Everyone, it's good to see you all. We'll officially call this meeting to order. We expect a few more folks, but I think I agree, Roger. Let's go ahead and get started and keep to the agenda that we've set, which is, as always, a busy one. Hopefully everyone has received a copy of if you haven't already, it should come. I know my hard copy of my budget book did come in the mail already, so thank you to the PPS staff involved in getting that out to us. And I know we have the materials electronically as well. So I think this will be the beginning. I see Roger's holding his up, great. The beginning of a great many discussions we will have together, both in, virtually in this platform as well as offline, as we work to pull together recommendations as a committee on the proposed budget. I'm guessing if you're like me, unless you have superpowers and the ability to speed read, you have not had a chance yet to digest all that is in the proposed budget. And if that is the case, do not fear. Like I just said, I think this is, the first of many conversations we'll be having about this. So I think it's good to come with, initial questions and listening ears, and we'll spend the next couple of weeks really digging in. So good. Well, without further ado, I think the first order of business is to do a roll call, and then we will do an approval of last meeting's minutes, which are February's minutes, since the last time we came together was a joint work session with the board. So we will go back to the February meetings and officially approve those. Before I do that, Yasuri, I think, is going to step in and do roll call for us, if I am correct. Yasuri?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. All right. So I'm going to go in order with our CBRC member list and then our PPS staff. Tastonga Davis. Okay. If I call the name and they don't answer, I'll go back to it after, just to make sure we got everyone. Sarah Kerr.
Present.
Roger Kirchner.
Present.
Judah McCauley.
I think Judah, just heads up, I should have said this to everyone when I did intros. Judah had his second vaccine yesterday and was saying he was not feeling well. So I think it's likely that he won't join us. He may join, but that is the good news, that he was able to get the vaccine.
Thank you. Brad Nelson.
Here.
Irina Phillips. I see Irina on here. Thank you. Leisha Posey. Jennifer Samuels.
Hello.
Huang Samuelson. Lisa Selman.
Here.
Renee Watson. Ilona Wilson.
Here.
Parker Myris.
Present.
Jackson Wingberg.
Present.
Okay, CBRC members, I'll call again just to make sure. Stronga Davis. Leisha Posey. Huang Samuelson. Renee Watson.
I'm Renee Anderson. I don't know who Renee Watson is.
We got it incorrect on here. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Rita, Director Moore.
Here.
Claire Hertz,
I'm here.
Norberto Delgadillo,
I'm here.
and I believe Nicole will not be accompanying us. Is that correct, Norberto?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, she
Okay.
won't be joining us. And I'll take that moment to give her a shout out for all the amazing work in getting the budget book out to everyone.
Shanice Clark, and Janice Hansen. I see other names also on the Google Meet, but I don't have them on my list. Would you like calling out your name to make sure I register that you are on here, please? Thank you, Terry. Anyone else?
I'm Craig Gibbons with Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission.
Thank you. Is that everybody?
I just received a text from Janice Hansen, and she's watching the live stream.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. And I believe I believe, yes, sorry, what you may be seeing, I think we are joined by two community members who are here to give testimony, which as a CBRC member in my time, this is the first time we've had public testimony submitted and delivered. And so I think those might be the names that you're seeing or the icons that you're seeing on your screen. Is it important for us to register them, Yasuri, officially and invite them to join in now and say their names? Or is that not necessary? I'm not familiar with the protocol.
Claire, would you give us some insight on that? Would you like us to register their names?
I only saw, I think I saw Kenya Anderson join, and is that a CBRC member?
Renee, I think that must just be your daughter or other family member's name that you're joining the community.
Yes. So I keep forgetting that Google Link, my computer does not like Google Link. So I'm on my daughter's computer.
Yeah.
And I forgot to rename it.
Claire, I think it's Tom, and I don't want to mispronounce the name, but Desjardins, I believe.
Yeah, this is Tom Desjardins with North Scott Learning Center. We're just attending as a community member. We also submitted written testimony.
That's what I thought. Great. Thanks, Tom. Say your last name one more time so I get it right.
Desjardins.
Desjardins, thank you. And I believe Joe McFerrin is also on?
Yes, Joe McFerrin is here. I'm with Tom.
Great. Welcome.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, welcome all. I think let's go ahead and review and move to approve the meeting minutes from our February convening, February 11th. If you have not had a chance to open them up, you have the link in your email. I will go ahead and open to any corrections to the meeting minutes as you have in your email.
If there are no corrections, I move they be approved as written.
Thanks, Roger. Can we get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay, in the agenda that you have, the next item that you have in the official agenda is a discussion of the 21-22 proposed budget. The agenda was sent. Oh, are you all getting feedback? Okay. reminder for folks, if you are not speaking, it's often helpful to stay on mute to avoid the feedback. Thanks. Before we do that, so we did receive, after the minutes after the agenda was sent out, we did receive public testimony letters from the two folks who have come to join us tonight. And I'm actually looking, Norberto, to you. I know we talked about this ahead of time, and I don't know that we had expected Tom and Joe to join. We had discussed reading the letters that were submitted into the record. Again, this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, and in my time 4 years on CBRC, we've not had the good fortune of having public testimony delivered this way. And so this is a new experience for me. So we're operating with grace as we navigate these waters. And so I wonder what the better move is, since we were joined by the members who did submit that testimony, if we want to invite them to read their testimony out loud.
I think it'd be, welcome them to speak and have the floor. I think that'd be great.
Okay.
This is Tom. I'm sorry. Thank you for that. This is Tom DeJardin. Actually, in the interest of time, I think we would just like to have our testimony a public record and not read it tonight. We don't want to defer any other things in the meeting. Just let the meeting proceed.
Okay. That sounds great. Thanks so much.
I want to thank the presenters. I found your testimony both compelling and cogent, and we'll explore with our staff how best to proceed, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, I want to second that. Roger beat me to it, but thank you very much for taking the time to share your thoughts, perspectives, experiences. I want to confirm that everyone else on CBRC has received copies of those two letters, that they were widely circulated. I'm seeing some shaking heads. Okay, so they came in earlier today. We will make sure right now, yes, sorry, if it's possible, to make sure that all CBRC has the two letters that were submitted, the testimony. That would be terrific. And we will make sure that they're officially entered into the public record as well. And look forward to engaging in conversation with my fellow CBRC members based on the really thoughtful remarks that you submitted. Okay, I think, Norberto, am I turning it over to you for this next part?
Yes, Sarah, it's turning it over to me. Hi, good evening, everyone. So it's that time of year where there's a lot of activity that's happening, and even more so when you're new and you're trying to get up to speed and get a sense of everything that's happening, along with all of the amazing work that the team's doing and everything that's happening across the country, to get us to a position where, hey, we're opening schools, and how are we preparing not just for the next month, not just for summer, but preparing for what the next few years are going to look like. And so essentially, the deck I am going to share is kind of like that opening to how are we going to start, what are some of the things we're taking into account, helping to build understanding around the current context. And the way the deck is laid out is it intentionally has these moments to pause so that we can look through and ask questions to each topic. And really, I'm not going to pretend to know all the answers, but I think it's going to be critically important for me to hear questions, feedback as we start working through this process, because what's unique with this budget is that it's tied to the fleshing out, the development of the strategic plan on top of what the next, on top of all the investments have happened over time, over the past year with the federal stimulus funding. So it's like, how does all of this come together to set the tone for what the next 2 to 3 years are going to look like? So there'll be definitely plenty of opportunities to pause. So I am going to present and see if I do this correctly. I am unable to share my screen. Let's see. I'm troubleshooting, so give me 1 minute. Okay, so unfortunately, I cannot share my screen. I don't have permission to share. And so what we can do is, Yasuri, are you able to share your screen? Or with?
Yes, I can do that if you'd like me to.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure you have the, I think you may have the deck, but so if you have screen sharing permissions, let me know once you're able to share. Oh, that would be great. Yeah, yeah. So okay, great. So if you do have the deck, you can follow along, and also I'm glad we're able to get it up for the sake of our viewers as well. So fantastic. So yeah. So if we go on to the next slide, essentially 3 topics for today. Kind of level set on where we are with the state funding levels, right? Create awareness around the fiscal assumptions being used for the proposed budget. Talk about the federal stimulus funding. There's been a lot of conversations around that, and so I think it's also important to level set on where we are with the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. That's one of those few times where I'm okay using the acronym, so ESSER funding. And then highlight some of the key investments in the proposed budget. And so introduce some of the key objectives around the budget, and how does that then start tying into not just what's going to happen over the next few weeks with summer programming, but then also the long-term strategic planning. And so kicking off with the state funding levels. So the budget coincides with the Oregon's legislature biennial budget. And so what we're building our budget off of is it's a $9.3 billion state school fund, $778 million SIA account, $318 million high school success fund. And on a whole level, this translates to about a $2 billion budget for the next fiscal year. And the key thing to point out here is that at the moment, the governor and the co-chairs have called for education appropriation of about $9.1 billion. So we're proceeding with the assumption of a $9.3 billion budget, but then at the state, they're currently working through a $9.1 billion budget. And if you go to the next slide, Yasuri, that $200 million difference, just to put it into context, translates to about a $7.5 million reduction for the next school year. And that is about 75 teaching positions. That's about 2 less days in the calendar. And I just need to reiterate that at this moment, we're not planning reductions. We're not, there aren't any rifts in the budget or anything like that. But it's really more just for context. And there is strong advocacy at several districts, and there's several conversations, and Claire can add color to this, around a $9.6 billion budget to really get us to the appropriate funding level where we are. But although planning for a $9.1 billion budget would require us to reassess, if it turns out to be 9.1 billion, it would require us to reassess how we're using our general fund, but then also just how are we thinking about those investments in the pandemic context. And so I'll get a little bit into that in the next section, but I think it's important to just kind of lay the groundwork with having to budget with moving pieces. So with that, I want to pause for this section. If you go to the next slide, yes, Sudi, being able to just, at this level, just what are some areas that we would need additional clarity, or as we start continuing to have conversations, some excitement, concerns, and just kind of additional thoughts. I just want to pause and open it up for some conversation, discussion, if there is any.
Mm-hmm.
And see, Roger, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I appreciate the of the multiple emails we received. Well, one reminded us that attachments to your emails are confidential and so on, and so that raises the question. Some of us have contacts within the legislature, and would it be appropriate if we were to make contact, and if so, would we have liberty to share this discussion page that you just presented, the state funding levels, where you discuss the effects of a 9.1 billion, 9.3 billion, and a 9.6 billion.
And Claire, you're more familiar with the legislature. I would say yes, but I don't want to speak out of term as I'm learning the Oregon political context here.
I would add, Roger, that it would be great for you to reach out. 9.6 billion is truly what we would need to maintain. If we took everything in general fund from this year and rolled it forward into next year, we'd need a $9.6 billion funding level. We have, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I happen to be in Rob Noss's district and Kathleen Taylor's district, and both have been closely associated with education budgeting in the legislature. So and Kathleen is a former member of CBRC. So.
Great. Perfect.
Roger and others, do you think that this might be an opportunity for us to do both individual outreach and outreach as a committee? I think it might. It seems like it would be worth us, putting a quick letter together and circulating it to folks with influence.
I would applaud that, really.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be very supportive of a letter from CBRC.
Great.
Can I add a little bit of color commentary?
Please.
I've been in a meeting the last 2 days with educational leaders in the Northwest, and a common theme is it's a five-state consortium, and the common theme is that in every state they're finding that the state legislators are working under the misapprehension that school districts are swimming in cash because of federal funding, and that it's very common for the state legislatures to be talking more or less openly about using federal funds to sort of backfill on decreasing the level of state funding to schools. and we had a meeting with several Congress people today, and they made it clear that that was not congressional intent. It's apparently not technically prohibited, but it is not congressional intent. So I think the situation we're facing in Oregon is not unusual.
Brad, I believe you have your hand up.
Yeah, I sent over quite a few questions. I know it was about 6 o'clock or so, but wanted to get those over. As I'm looking at these slides in this first section, it looks like the difference between the 9.3 and the 9.1 you're saying would be a $7 million reduction for PPS, right? For the 2021?
For that fiscal year, correct.
And so the difference between 9.1 and 9.6 is roughly, if every $1 million or every $100 million there, the difference is 3.75. So that difference is what, 18.75 between what you want to be at and 9.1?
So if you remember our 5-year forecast, we are using fund balance as well as we made a reduction in general fund. And so there's a combination of getting us to the funding level at 9.3, a combination of things that are occurring. So that's correct. That 9.6 would mean we wouldn't have to use fund balance. We would not have had to make those reductions. And we would be able to invest in our strategic plan.
But I guess the thing I was trying to get at is if that difference between 9.3 and 9.1 is 7 million, so every 100 million is 3.75 million. So the difference between 9.1 billion and 9.6 billion, as you're saying, is 18.75 million is the total. And this is just the state funding, right? This isn't dealing yet with the money that's going to come from the stimulus dollars. This is just you're talking about we're roughly 18.75 million short on what the level is that you want to have.
Correct. Yeah. And when we just look at the I was going to say general fund, but yeah, like the school state funding formula as that level, and it's bringing us up to Claire's point, bringing us up to the level where we don't have to rely on the fund balance, and then being able to continue to support the next school year and the following one as well.
Right, but I'm just trying to figure out so the difference between 9.1 and 9.6 is a difference of 18.75. I'm trying to figure out, whatever that difference is, for PPS, how much is going to get covered by, the stimulus money. I know that that's something totally different, and it said throughout the deck is that, the 9.6 keeps us where we're at currently. So my understanding of this is that a 9.1 budget gets you 18.75 less than where you want to be at to fund current levels. Is that right? Or
that is correct. And the reason it's Noberto wasn't here when we were doing the 5-year forecast, showing all the breakouts of the parts that we were pulling together to make the funding come together. So.
Because then later I'll ask, how much we're going to get from other sources to cover that 18.75, just to see how much money is actually coming in. And if I'm looking at this incorrectly, but I try and figure out. It's easy if you figure it out. How does this impact our school district? And I understand that the difference between 9.6 and 9.1. I can get to a point where I understand that we are 18.75 million less than you want to be to retain current levels. And if that's not the case, I'm just wondering, what is the difference between 9.6 billion and 9.1 billion?
So one of the things
impacting PPS, sorry.
Sure. So one of the things that I would draw to your attention, yes, we have federal ESSER funds that will more than take care of that. Those ESSER funds are temporary and are not a permanent source of funding. So yes, it will take care of what we need for this coming year. And most likely we'll get through most of, no, I need to look to see when we'd run out, but I think we'd run out in the second year.
I think they go through 2024, but I'm just, because he broke this down into the state funding levels, I figured we would focus first on just the state funding levels. As I understand this, the proposed of 9.1 is short 18.75 million for where you want to be.
Yes, Brad. And my concern is the sustainability, that the federal funds will go away after, because we're spreading them out over 2 years of funding, which is what we're hearing most Council of Great City School Districts are doing across the country, and we're following that example.
But that 9.1 is currently the worst case. I mean, that's the lowest offer. It's not, they're not proposing less than that, right?
The co-chairs of the Ways and Means carried the governor's budget funding level forward. Usually they increase it, but they actually kept it flat. And that's that $9.1 billion funding level. That's correct.
And Brad, to your point, like being able to solely look at the general fund and what we look at, yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, and just like looking at that solely, because to Director Moore's point, there is then this dynamic around like the ESSER funding is temporary. How do we ensure that we're continuing to fund our school district for the long term? Because then it's a bigger hill to climb 2 years from now versus making the right decisions now.
Well, if you think about it just in those terms, I think it's pretty clear that they're counting on the federal funds. They are 18.75 million light for PPS to maintain current funds. And so there is no question in my mind that they are using the stimulus money as a crutch or an excuse to not give the amount of money to the district that they should be. This 18, and that's what I want. That's the number I'm looking for. Is that what I see here is that they're basically, you know, the talk has always been we're going to keep things and we need to really support students. They're not doing it. They're basically trying to fund the schools, PPS specifically, light almost $19 million. And if you use your thing of, I don't know, whatever it is, 75 teachers, that's hundreds of teachers. I mean, that's not even, that is, you know, absolutely horrible what they're, you know, talking about doing. And this is in the middle of a pandemic when everybody's saying that we need to, you know, deal with learning. I'll get into the other stuff later, but that is a big, big difference.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think, Roger, did you have additional questions? No. Okay. Sarah, were you?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I was just gonna chime in and say, Brad, I think I just wanted to agree publicly, since folks can't read the chat who are watching, that I just wanted to second voraciously everything you said, and I'm seeing a lot of heads nod as well, and so I'm feeling like a good move for this committee is to very quickly draft a letter that we can circulate among us for quick approval, and that, you know, you want your name associated with this as a committee member, and then we try and get it off to the right folks. And I'm happy to take a first crack at that and get it circulated. I'll aim for tomorrow and see where I go. And if there's anyone else that wants to take a first pen with me, I'm happy to have help. I took some good notes, and I think I can at least get an outline out, and then, you know, really appreciate anyone who can jump in and improve it and add detail that you think is important. But I think it feels really good to move quickly on this. And I think sort of dovetails with, you know, what gives me pause or concern with it, which is just knowing the, you know, the impact that the last year plus has had on so many members of our community, some more so than others, how we move forward in a way that we're being incredibly thoughtful, both about the funding that's coming, you know, through the state funding formula, and using the federal resources in the way that they were intended to really help accelerate recovery, especially for those students who are most disparately impacted by, disruption to learning over the last year and a half. And so I guess it's both a mix of excitement and pause and concern, just to see how PPS is thinking about this and how you're thinking about not planning for the funds, but funding a really concrete plan that you have in service of students, again, especially those who have been most, impacted by this moment. And I think that's really hard. We say that a lot, and it's really hard to creatively and thoughtfully braid funding streams, especially right now. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about what that's going to look like.
Brad, did you have some additional feedback? Thoughts?
Yeah, but I think I've probably already talked too much. I'll wait. I'll give it a rest for a little bit.
Well, we have a few more sections of opportunities to discuss. So
I'll get one.
I'll be here all night.
Yep.
And I think that as we start thinking about what those dynamics look like in the next slide, Yasuri, it's now the federal stimulus dollars. So what we were just discussing and thinking about how do we budget with all these moving variables, there's still significant funding details to be resolved over the next few months. And even within the next few weeks, where are we going to land on the state budget? But then also, as an example, with the FEMA guidelines and reimbursements, that's been like a moving target. I think just recently we've received some concrete guidelines and some supportive information that the team's going to go through and assess. And then that ends up becoming like, okay, well, if we can offset some expenditures with FEMA reimbursements, then that may free up ESSER dollars. And then, hey, now we have an investment of about $250 million in summer programming that might also free up ESSER dollars now that we were originally thinking of leveraging for summer programming. So as you can see, there's these moving pieces that as the federal government has responded to the pandemic with 3 rounds of stimulus funding, and even just recently, the president released kind of like a preliminary proposal, skinny proposal of what like the human infrastructure investment can look like over the next few years. So that could change the funding dynamics within the next 6 months as well. So as we work through all these different pieces, one of the questions I get often is around like, well, what's happening with the stimulus dollars? What's the breakdown? And so on the next slide, this is kind of like your big table or big high level overviews. What this table is doing is general context regarding the different actions that Congress took over the past year, from the original CARES Act, the CRSS Act, and most recently the America Rescue Plan Act. And essentially the funding that's come across not just the country, but within Oregon, and what it's meant for Portland Public Schools. And then the conditions around, hey, we need to spend this funding by these specific dates that have been set at the federal level. And so on the next slide, it starts giving an idea around estimates of where are we projecting to spend and invest. And with that first round of ESSER funding, it's pretty much all gone. And then that little marker would say $0 to be spent for next year. Yeah, there's some of that variability where we might have some movement based on what happens with some of the FEMA reimbursements, but we've identified the big focuses in spending these dollars from reentry expenditures, filtration, the infamous SMRF 13 filters, and getting everything through, including as we're starting to think about how are we preparing for supporting the transition from getting ready to supporting limited instruction, in-person instruction, continuing to support the child nutrition model. As some of you may know, there are several waivers that were signed and gone through to allow us to shift our focus and be able to serve meals to all of our students in the community. And then with the most recent round of stimulus funding is now really how are we thinking about learning acceleration, and how are we thinking about those investments in respect to our strategic plan. And Brad, like, I think that like getting to the meat of your question around how are we going to be measuring these dollars in respect to our strategic plan, in respect to the work we're doing. And I think I don't know if I summarized it correctly, but and I think that's part of the ongoing conversations is assessing, okay, what is learning acceleration going to look like? And what are the different components that fall under that, whether it's tutoring, whole child support, being able to provide additional activities, but then also how does that tie into our racial equity and social justice lens? And these are like active conversations that the team is having right now, inclusive of tomorrow, there's a meeting with the Council of Great City Schools with the other CFOs across the country as we're thinking about like what are some of the best practices around how we create measures to support these or track these investments. And so like thinking through those dynamics, it's one of those where it's like, okay, how are we fleshing out our strategic plan? What are then those outcomes that the board established for us? And how are we tying in the graduate portrait? How are we tying into educator essentials? How are we tying in our racial equity and social justice framework to support that? It's keeping that in mind and fleshing that out is still like something that the team is working through. And so I'll stop talking because the next slide is really opportunity for us to continue with the discussion. So I want to just turn it over and Brad, your hand is up. Yep.
Oh, whoops, sorry about that. I'll go. I didn't mean that. Yeah, kind of getting back on that 18.75. I mean, this is all pretty much, this is all out there, and the legislators, they can see all these numbers. They know how much these things are. Everybody can figure out. It's almost comical how close this is to the shortfall. They are basically building this to how much money they're allocating it. The legislature, is basically saying we're going to do it less by 19 million for PPS because we know the federal government's going to kick in the extra money. For a couple of years, we're going to have a little bit more money, but then it's going to be significant less starting, like Claire said, starting in September of 2023. So for the first 2 years, this is, I guess, okay. But, my biggest concern as I'm looking at this is not a legislature that is proposing a budget to try and remedy for COVID. This is basically taking advantage of the federal government and trying to allocate as little money as possible, using all of these funds, basically just to get us back to roughly what it is, before. So I don't know how much of that you can agree with or anything, but it looks like, that 19 million is taken up pretty quickly by that 62 and that 20. So, I mean, that's 27. So there's a little bit extra, but seems like what this is.
Brad, there's one more source of funding from the state, and that's the 250 million that's to be spent between May 1st and September 30th. So one thing that I would say is the state has allocated some funds in an urgent manner, and literally we're just getting the rules on how to spend, and we're supposed to start spending in 2 weeks, right? And so but we're figuring this out all as quickly as we can. I wish I could share with you all the things we're doing because we're still designing that work, because I got the rules on Tuesday, right? And that's not even the final rules, right? And I'd love to share with you how we planned this all out. At the same time, we're opening up in hybrid our middle and high school students, right, on Monday. So bear with us. We do want to get to you all the decisions and where we're headed and how we're processing and get your feedback and your input. But we're processing all of this as quickly as we can. But I wouldn't want to portray the state as not. I want to make sure that we're not forgetting to look at that big infusion of resources to really help with learning acceleration, and also just they talk about kids having fun this summer. Everyone's been home for a year. It's time to get outside and have lots of safe and healthy activities for kids, all prepared, for occurring in the pandemic. So I'm excited about that source of funding from the state as well.
But it's a big number, 250, but that is not PPS's portion. PPS's portion is less than is a small single digit
14,
number.
Yeah. I was just going to for reference, it's approximately 14.7 million. Yeah,
and that's going to go. That's going to go pretty fast. So, yes,
right, we have 4 months to spend it, so we don't have a long time to spend it. So.
Yeah, I think I think a theme that is important for me as we start thinking about this, and I think it's important to I would hope, and Brad, it's on something, hitting on a theme you're reaching on, is sustainability, and like what does that look like as we think about not just this moment in time, but what are the appropriate investments what does that level of appropriate investment look like over the next 3 to 5 years, and the level of lift to get us where we need to be, knowing those dynamics that a lot of this is this federal funding is one-time money, and then we need to be able to continue to sustain thereafter. Sarah, you have your hand up, or Roger? I'm sorry, I think Roger, you had your hand up first.
I wasn't aware I have it says lower hand. Oh, I better click on that, I guess. I'm sorry.
No worries. Sarah.
Thanks. So I'm going to say two things. One, just a reminder to us all, and I'm saying this out loud to myself too, that I think we've talked about norms for this group. And one of them is to, share the air. And if you're someone that is more likely to talk, sometimes it's good to step back. If you're someone that's less likely to talk or feeling reluctant, I would encourage you to step up and step in this moment. And I said this before, I think, none of us have all the answers. And I think this is just a nice opportunity to have conversation. It would be really helpful for me, and I think for PPS too, as we start to formulate the set of recommendations as a committee that we want to give on this proposed budget, the more opportunity we have to hear even initial thoughts or reactions that are not fully formed. I think we really would encourage folks to jump in as much as you feel comfortable, because I think it'll only help all of us, wrap our heads around our collective sense of understanding, as well as just, where are we all coming, as we're absorbing this information, what even just initial reactions. We tend to operate intellectually in this space, but I think there's room for heart and feeling too. So just even any emotional reactions that you have to, the budget statement itself and the direction in which the district is heading, I think just encourage everyone to voice that in this meeting as much as possible. That's my longer remark. And then I'm going to try and stay quiet, since, as you all know, I'm someone who is, often needs to step back and give space to others. The second thing I just want to underscore is that I hear everything that Norberto and Claire, you're saying about kind of the stimulus dollars, the federal relief dollars being one time. And I just want to put out the idea of that being true. And at the same time, I think there are real opportunities for PPS to use this one-time unprecedented infusion of resources to step back and say, what are the things that we have been trying to do for years for our kids and haven't done successfully, and can accelerate? Maybe we aren't going to have year-over-year funding available, but are there investments in our curriculum and materials that we can accelerate and get out faster? We so desperately know that our curriculum needs to be updated, right? It's in our strategic plan. Can we use the federal resources to make that happen faster? Can we give teachers who are exhausted and demoralized and doing the hardest work they've ever done, yet feeling less successful than they ever have? Are there ways that we can give teachers more time to collaborate in better ways, right? Like things we've wanted to do, we know are important to do. How can we use this money to accelerate some of that, even as we recognize that it's not going to be sustained over time? I do think that there's like a middle ground, right? So I'm looking forward to hearing about ways in which the district is thinking about, using this to accelerate some of the big priorities we have for kids. And I know that does come through to me in my initial read, but I think that's something that I'm looking for in the budget personally.
So I want to make sure that I'm being clear that we are delighted and excited to have the federal stimulus dollars coming to PPS. And so we are really, it has helped us prepare our schools to open them mid-year. And it has been a gift from the federal government to support us in a pandemic. And it has been an extraordinary measure for us to receive the amount of funding that we're talking about. So we are delighted to have that funding. And at the same time, we are also wanting to make sure the state understands that we're concerned about long-term sustainability when their funding level goes down. So it's just a mixed message, Sarah. I don't want to we are so excited to have those federal stimulus dollars, and we're absolutely talking about using those resources to have the training to roll out, math and adoption and complete our literacy adoption so that we have lots of professional development for our teachers as they're learning new curriculum. So absolutely that is part of our plans. So more to come, and I do appreciate that it is a great opportunity for us. Thank you.
And that's a great segue into the next section. As we think about some of the key objectives that we're contemplating in the proposed budget. And as we think about budgeting with moving variables, that there's still some key areas when we think about the pandemic recovery. And so safety, stabilizing staff ratios. So when we start thinking about how we normally allocate staff and the enrollment modeling that we use, there's some uncertainty with that. And so leveraging essentially kind of holding harmless and leveraging from last year's to maintain enrollment, and then allocations, and then the other key thing around learning acceleration. So thinking about all the different opportunities to really prep our students into next year. And really, less about learning recovery and really learning acceleration as we think about Saturday school, summer programming, tutoring, and really like hitting on professional development as well, as we think about how we leverage one-time funding, essentially like as an investment that keeps on giving, and some of those high impact areas that essentially continue to pay dividends in themselves. And that's a key area as well in enhancing and building capacity. And then on the next slide, it's hitting on the continued evolution of the strategic plan. So as the strategic plan continues to be designed and fleshed out, and we start as we start unearthing what are the strategies, the tactics to execute on these strategies, that's part of those investments as well, as we start thinking meeting the board goals and thinking about the 7 shifts that the board and CBRC had the joint session, and Jonathan Garcia spent a good amount of time talking through and really the vision as we continue to flesh that out over the next year. I think it's going to be key in also thinking about how we align our investments to meeting these goals, and it is an interesting dynamic as we start thinking about aligning resources to strategy, and it's within the context of these moving pieces that it kind of emphasizes the word proposed, as we know that there'll be changes coming up. So I'll pause there and really just provide another opportunity on the next slide just for some additional discussion. Roger.
I'm one who follows board meetings, so I'm going to the page where you said stabilizing staff ratios at schools and due to unknown enrollment fluctuations and so on. I know we have a couple unions that are in collective bargaining that have made presentations recently that seem to indicate that they're getting the short end of the stick in terms of how the district is dealing with COVID concerns involving our staffs. And I know Claire is probably not privileged to share what's going on in those negotiations, but I guess we're Judah on the call tonight. I know he had expressed in our previous meeting a concern about what the nutrition services and custodial staffs were receiving by way of PPE and bonuses or whatever for hazard pay and whatever. And I'd like to see what kind of response we are giving in an equitable way.
So in terms of the SEIU, bargaining is still continuing. They met again today, our bargaining teams, and we have been responsive in many of their requests, and we will continue to work at the bargaining table to find a solution that will work for everyone. So Roger, you're right that it's very difficult for me in the middle of a bargaining for me to share this in a public meeting, but certainly we're very concerned about the health and safety of all of our staff, especially our nutrition services, our cooks and our custodians who've been in our working in our buildings for the past year, feeding our kids and making sure our buildings were ready for students to return this spring. So it is certainly with high admiration and for them working so hard in their daily operations in providing for our students. So we really appreciate both our cooks and our custodians in all the work that they've done for our students.
And Roger, I don't know if you're raising your hand again or, okay, just making sure. And Brad had a question in the chat box. I'll read it. It says, curious to know if the key objectives are different enough that CBRC needs to reevaluate the criteria we're using to evaluate the proposed budget. And Claire, I kind of turn it over to the group. I don't know enough context to really answer the question based on like historical work that CBRC has done towards assessing the proposed budget. But I don't know if any thoughts or
But we still have our 5 system shifts. We're seeing them starting to expand. I think you saw that in our March meeting to possibly 7 shifts. And so by June 15th, we'll have a strategic plan that will be fully fleshed out and presented to the board at that point. So we're still, because of the pandemic, it's been very hard to engage. We've especially been engaging with Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations in terms of students and staff and community members. And so the we did pause for about over a month here in the middle of this strategic plan process, just trying to get the schools open, probably about 6 weeks. And we're gearing up again to begin after the middle and high schools open on Monday. So the following week we'll get back into the strategic plan mode. So I do appreciate the question. I don't know that at this point that we have significant differences, especially as we're building the budget, and we will be landing the budget as well as the strategic plan at the end of the year. So it is still a year in flux, and certainly with the pandemic we would have liked to have completed this work, but it has been a challenge to be able to finish everything with all the other things we've been doing and just keeping all the health and safety protocols ready and all the different versions of school that we've had this past year. So I appreciate the question, Brad, but we're just not quite ready yet to say that there's a significant difference. We're still in an evolving state.
Roger, you had a question.
Just to clarify Claire's response, June 15th is also, according to the calendar, the night that the board takes final action on adoption of the budget, and also here has the TSCC hearing. And if they're going to deal with the strategic plan that night, that's a heck of an agenda right there.
Brad, did you have a proposal for a different set of criteria in mind that would be helpful to share with the group at this point? Seems fine if not, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we were focused on was that student portrait. And I think some of the things that are in that, or the portrait of the student graduate or whatever. And I think a lot of those are going to be tough, especially in the short term to measure, especially some of the testing that's going on, because the testing just, it's really not there, or it's not going to be as widespread or as detailed. I think one of the things we should probably look at this as a committee, but rather than kind of focusing on some of that, I think we can look at some of the system shifts, but I think take some of these key objectives, because we were, looking at, third grade reading, eighth grade math, students that are, ready to go out into the world. Obviously, Director Moore would know these, she's dealt with them forever. But, I think those are things that I think are going to be hard for us to be able to measure. Is this budget really going to increase that? I don't know that I think we need to kind of think about that, because while I think a lot of the data that we were trying to tie that into was useful, I think we might be well served by kind of expanding that for how things are going to be so different here in the short term. So I think probably just have a discussion and see if if there's other stuff that we want to kind of focus on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's collectively remember to keep that in mind, Brad. I trust that you'll hold us accountable and help us remember. Maybe there's a version of this where we are able to kind of continue to use the set of criteria, with the graduate portrait at the center, and the metrics associated with that, and where we pull in some additional criteria to help give feedback or weigh in on some of the proposed uses of the more immediate, recovery dollars in the context of all else that the district is trying to do. So it would be great if other folks have input or perspective on this, feel free to share it now, or I think now is a good time, I think, in the process to start, emailing ideas, communicating outside of the meetings. I think we'll begin to do a lot more of the in-between meeting work, once we have this proposed budget in hand as we do so. But I encourage other folks, if you have a perspective on this, to please let us know.
Director Moore or Roger, yes.
I was going to say, at the board meeting on Tuesday night, the board took action to hold in abeyance a lot of testing. Dr. Moore could clarify probably, But if we're going to try to base our recommendations and review of the budget on some kind of a database, then maybe we best tap Dr. Brown to come and brief us on what limited data we do have. So.
Yeah. Hey, Director Moore, before you jump in, I'm just process suggestion. Jennifer, I think it's a great suggestion since seem like we're taking a minute and having a good conversation. It might be nice to close the slides for a few minutes and we can see each other. I know I can only see 8 people at a time on my screen or maybe 10. So good suggestion. Thanks. Director Moore, back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because of the situation and the absence of reliable testing data, the board has suspended for this year the metrics that were established to measure progress toward the goals. The goals, we've maintained the goals. We've just suspended the quantitative measures with the assumption that over the summer, the board will kind of recalibrate, actually more likely in the fall, after the first map test, the board will then recalibrate the quantitative measures for progress toward the goals. And on Tuesday, what we decided was to refrain from participating in the SBAC test for this spring. But I think it's fair to say that the board has indicated, and this may even have been in the resolution, the map testing will resume in the fall, and that the map tests are actually the focus for the metrics around the goals. So I don't know if that helps at all.
I have a follow-up question, unless someone else has their hand up. My understanding was that map testing has not been fully suspended. Like there are students across the district who have been taking map tests this entire year, and so is that just we're not using that, or?
There's only been one test in the winter. Normally it's 3 tests over the course of the academic year. So we only did 1 test this year in the winter.
Mm-hmm. And there's not spring. I didn't realize spring.
No.
What
we heard loud and clear from pretty much everybody, including the superintendent, is students are just now getting back into the classroom, and there's very limited instructional time in person. And the whole point of this, of bringing the kids back, is to focus on, a lot of it's focusing on social emotional learning and reconnection and that sort of thing, and sort of solidifying relationships. And now would be a terrible time to have testing. So, and the validity of the tests, especially SBAC, the validity of that test under these circumstances would be extremely questionable. So anyway, so a decision was made to do 1 map test in the winter, suspend it for the spring, and pick it up again in October.
And Sarah, do you have your hand up? Additional? Okay.
Just forgot to pull it down.
No, it's okay. And I think that really, as far as the slide deck goes, is really essentially just a few key dates that are coming up from April 27th, when the superintendent proposes the budget the superintendent's message as part of the proposed budget is shared along with CBRC in attendance. And then I think that one of the other key dates is May 4th in having a work session around public engagement with the budget. And I think that and I may be going out of sequence in the agenda, talking about May 4th and work session there, but I can pause. I don't want to break any protocols there and do that. But okay, right. So just for what it's worth, here's some high-level dates, key activities that are coming up. And we can talk a little bit about May 4th in a few minutes, but really just highlighting some of the key dates here. And just really a lot of activity that's going on. So I know that we're all interested in seeing how we have to essentially acknowledging that there's these two parallel tracks with budget development along with strategic development and some of the close work and collaboration that needs to be happening across many stakeholders. And I can say that I've started conversations as well with Dr. Brown and Dr. Cuellar, and thinking about like what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as well as we continue to flesh this out. And I think it's also fair to say that right, it's a year or 18 months ago, no one foresaw a pandemic. So we know that as we're coming out of one, there'll probably be things that we didn't plan for or foresee, and therefore being flexible as we think about all of the key activities that leading up to the 15th, but then also June 15th, but then also what happens over the course of the year will be interesting as we continue to work through this and our strategic plan. So with that being said, we can wrap this up. And really, I think the next topic was around the local option levy. And so if CBRC members, you should have received the documents, and I know there was a handful of questions that Irina, you shared, and I believe most of them might have been answered. But I also want to just, as I'm in full transparency, continuing to learn and wrapping my head around the local option levy, which I will say very grateful that is some resource and funding that we have, that I do know and can acknowledge. But I want to just also turn it over to Claire to just see some additional insight or topics of key things to point out as we have a discussion around the local option levy.
So I just want to check in. Thank you, Noberto. I want to check in with Sarah. As I wasn't in the agenda planning, I just wanted to make sure, was this a time for CBRC to talk about your plan for how you go through and do that verification process with the local option levy? Is that what the intent of this agenda item was for?
I think Judah was going to handle this agenda item, and as I had shared at the top of the meeting, he is under the weather as a result of the COVID vaccine and isn't with us. So I think probably what makes the most sense is for us to follow up with a little bit more information via email to the group. I think send questions you have. I think I'll also share. We can reshare the example of the review that we did that we submitted last year, which is, it lags a year. So it was the 2021 budget review and the 1920 local option levy review. And so I'm happy to circulate that for the group, but it's a pretty straightforward process. I've been through it a few times now. I think we have the numbers. We, our charge is to make sure that the funding that is raised through the levy is spent as intended. And so we'll go through a pretty basic verification process. We'll make sure that everyone on the committee has a chance to review it as well. And then we'll submit it alongside our budget recommendations. out of words tonight.
Great. And
And
so
if there
we'll
is
make,
any, oh, go ahead.
we'll make sure that you have all the data that you need from us in order to complete that process. Yeah. So maybe that was what was intended by the agenda item. Thank you.
We'll assume so in Judah's absence. Does any committee members, anyone have questions or about the process itself or about the data that we received via email? Okay.
I would like to make sure the CBRC knows that they're invited to come to the board meeting on April 27th and watch the superintendent deliver the budget message and the proposed budget, so that there'll be a presentation, and I think that will really help you digest some of the materials. And we are still, we will have the second volume with school data prepared for you shortly. I don't have an exact timeline, but I know that it's in the works, and we're working quickly to get that assembled.
Thank you.
Perhaps,
go ahead, Roger.
I was gonna, maybe Claire can, I was trying to thumb through the budget we just received in the mail. Always our report from the previous year and our local option levy report from the previous year is always published in the book someplace. So usually up toward the front. So maybe Claire, you can direct us to where it is. But
I'm not sure that it's in the proposed budget document. I'm not sure that it is, but what I can do is make sure that I know they're posted on our website and with our CBRC committee materials. And it's also posted, of course, under the board meeting from last year, from when you presented the reports. But if it's helpful, we're happy to give that back to you via email, the two reports, so that they're on top of the email box. Happy to do that too.
Milberto, I'm looking at you because I think we skipped ahead a little bit, right? Because I think the fourth official agenda item beyond open discussion was to talk about some of the upcoming opportunities. So I want to give you a chance if there are other things that you wanted to highlight that you didn't previously.
No, I think the big one is a reminder regarding the May 4th work session, and that is something that I'm excited to help put together and lead. And so we're putting together the framework for it, really thinking about how we can incorporate our racial equity and social justice lens and how we're thinking about measuring as well, and some of those dynamics where, right, when we start thinking about there's hard data and then there's other data, human data around, what kind of questions can we be asking our community around how we think about investing this, particularly in this point in time where we're coming, we're turning the corner in a pandemic, and we know that we have these different budgeting variables. So as putting this together, I'd love to just kind of get some general feedback, thoughts around the concept of like the World Cafe, and thinking about how we create opportunities for discussion around questions that are not just budget technical, but also like human-centered around how we think about the budget moving. And one of those things, it's like the springboard. It's like the word I've been using is the springboard towards, right? We're going to be launching our strategic plan, and it's springboarding into the next few years. So with that, I just kind of open it up for discussion and just additional details, and knowing that you all have my email, so you can definitely also send me additional thoughts, but I wanted to just share that.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that, about your vision for that? What kind, are you looking for input from the community that could inform adjustments to how the district plans to spend its resources or budget its resources for this cycle? Like, is there a very immediate practical reason for this, or is it sort of longer term, broader engagement? And I apologize if I missed that, but I'm just trying to.
So I think it's and Claire can also help me here, but the way I'm thinking about it is reconciling how we have this moment in time with budgeting, but also how are we starting to set the precedent for the type of engagement we want to keep on doing. And so I'm looking at this not just as an opportunity for the now, but how can we start piloting and creating these ongoing engagements? Because really, a vision I have is when we start thinking about budgeting, it's not just what happens in April. it's this ongoing conversation, and how are we thinking about our leading and lagging indicators across the work we're doing, and how does that translate into our budget and meeting our board goals and meeting the work we're doing. And so May 4th for me is essentially like, how do we start putting those pieces together for the type of conversations we want to have? So back to, yes, there may be some, hey, number investment type questions. What do you feel about tutoring, right? Or whatever the case is. But then also, what are some key themes that we need to be thinking about when we start thinking about the investments for our Black students, and how are we measuring that? Like, what does that mean in the context of the work we want to do, not just now, but for the long term, and continuing to do that. So it is for me like an opportunity to start putting these different frameworks together, both from a community engagement perspective. Well, I say both, but three-prong: community engagement, resource alignment, and then racial equity and social justice. And so it's, how do we start? And that's no easy task, I'll be the first to admit, and really thinking about the evolution of that.
Yeah, I think including performance measures in successive years will be super important, especially around the board goals, seeing how the funding we're putting towards those goals are actualized in better student performance. So I'm looking forward to seeing that.
I appreciate that. Yep.
Yeah, I'd second that, Jackson. I really appreciate that as well. And I think one of the things, those of you who've worked with me know I'm an open book. I just want to be honest and saying I'm struggling. So I understand on the one hand the reality of the situation we're in, and I think I can understand why decisions about, potentially, although I'm admittedly personally struggling with that as well, but why a spring MAP administration was suspended, and why PPS is making a decision not to participate in SBAC. I understand why. I understand the tension and the challenges behind those decisions, and I'm worried that absent information about how students are doing, and I'm not just talking about sort of hard metrics like you said, math and reading performance, but I'm just left craving information about the health and well-being, both academically and social emotionally, of our students. And as a district, I know, and I've heard this time and again, how important it is for us to be student-centered and data-driven. And again, I don't think that is just hard, data metrics and numbers on academics. And I think this goes back to, points that Brad, you've raised many times, and I've heard others. I'm just, I think it is a real challenge right now to figure out how we ground every decision that we're making about, dollars that we're spending, resources that we're allocating, decisions we're making, supports, et cetera, without good information. So I'm really looking forward to more of that and those clear metrics in successive years. Jackson, to your point, and in the short term, I'm really craving some more information about how this year we are coming to understand collectively how students in PPS are doing, not in the aggregate, but how groups of students, especially those who have been, historically furthest from opportunity, the extent to which they are being well served or not right now. And so I'm just saying out loud that I'm struggling with that and struggling with how we as a committee can weigh in absent that information as we think about resource allocation moving forward.
Yeah, and I think when we're doing learning acceleration, I think that'd be a great place where we can try to understand how we are allocating those resources, especially since they are one-time funds. We want to use them to the greatest extent that we are able to with the greatest impact. So reevaluating how we are spending those pretty continually, just to make sure that they're going towards practices or resources that are actually going to produce results for our students is going to be super important to me.
I agree with Jackson, and I was thinking maybe we can come up as a school district with some kind of evaluation for the success of the summer accelerated learning or Saturday academy or the evening academy, that these people who are going to accelerate students or catch up students will have some meat to report on. So we are devoting money right now, and it would be nice to have some report evaluating student success, money spending success for the summer investment.
We will have, teachers are grading their students. So we will get assessments that teachers are doing, even though, and then the MAPS test is the reason I like the MAPS test is it helps the teachers evaluate where the students are. It's not used to put them in a hole. It's to help the teacher figure out where they are and then work towards moving them along. So that's something they've been using since the fall. And now they're testing them. And one of the things that has been said in research is the test that the teacher's grades tell more about students' success or not succeeding in college than test tests. So if we're looking at what the teachers are saying about their children, about their students, we can get a picture of what's going on.
Is there a process in place in PPS to do any sort of aggregation though across course grades? Is that something we've historically looked at as a way to kind of in the aggregate get a sense of?
I'm sure that we can get information back to you, but I don't have that answer tonight.
Yeah. Aggregation of what?
That's a good course grades in some way.
Yeah, I know I was
I
shared
was
with
building
my
off
schools
of Renee's comment. Yeah.
with a distribution of percentage of A's, B's, C's, D's, F's, and it was aggregated by subject area. And there was a district-wide and then my own high school as well.
Right. Yeah, I know we did it at Grant.
Yeah, that's a good point in the chat, Jackson. about grading practices this year. All of this is reinforcing, I think someone, I forget who it was, had suggested maybe having time with Russell would be, Dr. Brown, sorry, would be potentially useful for us as a committee. Maybe we can even generate a set of questions that we have and submit over to him in his office ahead of time, or communicate via questions that way. So something for us to consider for the next agenda potentially.
Can I mention, if I remember correctly, I think the next board meeting, which I think is on the 26th, will include a presentation from Dr. Brown about the MAP test, the winter MAP test. So, so you might want to listen to that first, and then if you still have questions, then you might want to make arrangements for him to visit with CBRC.
Along those same lines that Dr. Moore just mentioned, you might also want to look at the discussion that Dr. Brown led at the last board meeting on Tuesday this week that dealt with this very same subject in the board's decision to hold an advanced MAPS test until the fall. So.
Other questions or comments for discussion? I think at this point in the agenda, I think that we don't have any other official orders of business or things, agenda items. So I think I would just open it up one final time to the floor for any conversation, discussion, questions that you have not yet had a chance to raise. I'll move to close.
Can I ask for one clarification? Do we know for certain that school districts will be held harmless this year on enrollment? Is the state school fund going to be based on the 2019-20? No. What school year is the enrollment going to be based on for the state school fund?
So the state school fund formula has a thing called extended average daily membership, or ADM. And so what that means is how many students attend on an average across the whole year. And then the extended means you look at the prior year's enrollment, or ADM, for the year, and then you look at the current year's ADM. Whichever is higher, you get to count. So that means for 2021, our 19-20 numbers are higher because of the pandemic. For 21-22, we'll be able to use either the 21-22 numbers or the 2021. It will not go back to 19-20. So this year we're on being funded at last year's higher enrollment level. Next year, we're projecting that half the students would come back as our initial put it out there number, and then we'll see, we'll adjust that during the year when we see the actual numbers. And we also need to see how the numbers end this year too, in terms of students.
So to check my understanding, Claire, at the state level, we're not being held harmless. We're sticking to the formula. And so then internally, though, we're budgeting based on our last year's numbers for FY22.
So yes, we're saying no. We're actually taking this year's numbers and assuming half of them would return next year as numbers, and then
Okay, so it's
and that's on revenue. That's on revenue side, and how we allocated staff was at the 19-20 enrollment higher levels. So I just want to be clear. There's a money coming inside, and what we did in decisions made, and money going out, expenditures and decisions that we made.
So when you say half, you're assuming that half will come back. You're talking about half of the students who didn't show up this year, right? You're assuming that half of those students will actually return, not that half of the total enrollment will.
No. I mean the difference. Half of the difference. Half of the ones that didn't come this year. Yes, that's correct.
And is that assuming that we're back to a full-time 5-day-a-week school, in-person school reopening in the fall?
So I would say our budget has not, and revenue is not impacted by how we hold school. I mean, I can't say the budget isn't impacted. I can't say that, but I'm saying the allocations haven't changed because of based on how we're having school. Right now, we're allocating in the same staffing formula we've used in the past in terms as if we were in person. So that's what we've allocated on. If that makes sense. I know I'm probably talking in circles, but I want to make sure I'm being clear. So the revenue is projected as half of the students that didn't come back this year coming back next year. And we've allocated classroom teachers based on the highest count of enrollment, which was back in 1920. Because we don't want to have large class sizes. So we've maintained teachers because we also didn't want to shift a bunch of teachers around the schools. We know that's not good for kids. It's not good for staff. It's not good for schools as a whole when you break up teams. So we wanted to give students and families a chance to return to school before we made any kind of adjustments.
Right. So it could have a downstream impact potentially, and now I'm just checking my understanding, which is probably wrong, that if for whatever reason we don't get half of all students, the figures that you just shared, the estimates, this fall, then next budget cycle, we could find ourselves in a situation where we're seeing the decreased enrollment and sort of paying the price for it, if you will, for lack of a better word. Well, but this year, because we're using numbers, old numbers.
So in the future, if they don't show up, if they don't come back, then we will. We also figure that if we don't receive the state funding to pay for them, we'll use ESSER funding, and it'll also reduce class sizes while we're working learning acceleration. So we do have that temporary funding to do that for next year as needed. And then the following year, we'd need to make an adjustment. It's not something that we could permanently carry forward.
Right. Okay, thank you. Okay. Final call for questions. So I'm just going to do
bring everybody's attention to at the board meeting on Tuesday. Superintendent did announce that barring unforeseen circumstances due to COVID, the school district will operate full-time for all students starting on 1st of September. Also presented to the board was the preliminary school calendar. And so on, all that's accessible on the website.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And that's contingent on a bargaining, correct? I mean, there's still a labor agreement that needs to be forged for that to be true, correct?
My understanding is the PAT contract is already in place, and their ongoing discussions being held with the SEIU dealing with nutrition and custodial. Claire might have more information on that.
So we have met with PAT most of the year and to open up in CDL, to open up in Lippy, and then to open up in hybrid. And we have not done our regular contract work. So we are due to do our normal negotiations, and we haven't started them for actually the 2021 year, because we've been so focused on the health and safety and opening schools in 3 rounds of bargaining. So more to come on PAT bargaining, but we haven't started. Everyone's focused on opening schools right now.
Brad?
Yeah, just maybe between now and the next meeting, Claire and Alberto, if we could get kind of an update on the student and the SIAs and where we are and what it was, because initially it was estimated that it was going to be horrible because the state was everything was just was going to crater, but then it came back that it wasn't as bad. And my understanding from what I'm reading is that things have continued to improve, where that student investment account. And I bring this up for 2 reasons. 1, I'm interested, and 2, because it's another indication that the state is not funding the schools to the level that they need to be, because that money is coming, from a lot of the, the companies that are running around, and operating in, in Oregon, and there's a lot of money that's going into that, which is a good indication that there is, things are crazy, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of companies that are not doing horrible. And I think, just looking through these numbers, I am very, and Claire, you're very diplomatic about this. I am very thankful that the federal government is stepping up and providing these funds so that, our kids, right now, the state is way behind. They are not stepping up here. This is very disappointing on the part of the state. So I know you can't say anything about that, but I think as parents, we need to make that determination. They are not trying to help us get out of the pandemic. They're trying to use the pandemic as an excuse to underfund the schools. So I don't want to keep talking or else I'll get mad. So
Channel that energy into the letter. I'll send you a draft quick. Good. Well, thanks everyone for a really productive session. I appreciate everyone's engagement, and thank you to the PPS staff. I'm excited to have Norberto on board and welcome you. And I know your learning curve is about as steep as it can get given the circumstances and the time of year in which you're coming into this job. So we look forward to working with you, continuing to work with you, and are happy to support you and vice versa. I know is true. So.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate Claire's patience and grace.
I'm just delighted to have a partner in the work for sure. And eventually I'll phase out of the CBRC, and Norberto and Nicole will be the leads. But for tonight, we didn't want to leave Norberto all by himself. So
we're pretty friendly, Okay, I have, just as far as some quick next steps, I just want to again underscore the calendar and the upcoming activities. I know we've said this a few times, but I think the more CBRC engagement in some of these upcoming learning opportunities as I see them, the April 27th, I think it will be recorded. So if you can't watch it live, it would be great to try and prioritize watching it ahead of our work session 2 days later, so that we're all coming into it smart and kind of up to speed on the big messages in the proposed budget. I have a to-do to take the pen first on a draft letter to the Oregon Legislature, and I'll try and circulate that so you all can make it better, and we can work on as a committee getting that sent off. I think I'm hearing a lot of urgency on behalf of all of us to voice our concerns and use our collective voices in that way. And then I put this in the chat, but ahead of our working session, Brad, I think you made a proposal that we spend a good amount of time thinking about criteria. And so to the extent you have time or others on the committee have time to give that some thought ahead of our work session, I think it would be great to have some ideas to react to, so we're not sort of coming to an open, empty Google Doc, right, where you just see the page and a cursor flashing, and we're all trying to generate ideas. So I would encourage folks to come with some ideas in place. And then the last thing I'll say is, Director Moore, as you were having initial conversations with your fellow board members, if there are particular places, aspects of the budget where you think you anticipate there being a lot of debate amongst board members, for example, or you feel like you have less visibility as a board into the perspective of the community, please let us know so that as we have our work session, it would be great to have that window so that we can focus our efforts on giving you information that would be most useful as you all consider the budget.
Sorry. I did ask around, and I got one response. And I would be interested in CBRC's perspective on the extra money we're getting due to COVID and how we transparently and effectively use it to support our students this summer and fall. And further, their perspective on how these additional funds will specifically move the dial on the board goals. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I said it sounds a lot. Yes, I just realized that. It was bound to happen at some point. It sounds very in line with a lot of the conversation we've had tonight. So that is encouraging, and I suspect we can offer some input. Great, thank you. Okay. Thanks, everyone, and be well and enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
coming.
everyone.
Yeah.